It is perhaps the most tragic moment in all of Warhammer 40K's massive lore, and arguably, it's been changed dramatically. The death of the great angel Sanguinius at the hands of the arch-traitor Horus Lupercal, the War Master. A large portion of the Warhammer community believes that the End in the Death Part 2, where the epic duel between brothers takes place, changed everything about the Blood Angel's Primarch's death, that his tragic sacrifice is now rendered meaningless. But from where I stand, and how I see it, the new lore is 1,000 times more tragic, and his loss that much more meaningful. But going all the way back to Realm of Chaos, at the first mentions of the Horus Heresy in any Warhammer 40K rulebook, Sanguinius always lost his life facing his brother in single combat. Even before the Primarchs had all been named, or even elevated from just Space Marine leaders into the strange demigod sons of the Emperor, Sanguinius was destroyed utterly by the War Master. Back in the days when Obi-Wan's Sherlock Clouseau was the face of the Inquisition, the death of the Angel was a mythical legend even in universe. But what if I told you that the argument that people are using to diss on the new lore from the End in the Death is that he no longer puts a chink in Horus's armor, which later allowed the Emperor to land the killing blow on his wayward son? That it took both the Emperor and Sanguinius to kill Horus. And that argument is not quite accurate. So the reason why is not necessarily a lie, but not necessarily accurate, is that it was propaganda that the Imperium spread to give their citizens hope, and a heroic figure to venerate as the Imperial cult sprang up in the wake of the heresy. The Blood Angels Codex from 3rd and the Angels of Death Codex from 2nd edition gives us a glimpse into this being the case. That it was spread throughout the Blood Angels as their inner lore, mostly as a coping mechanism. And from there it was canonized throughout the Imperium as lore, as Sanguinius himself was canonized as an Imperial saint. So let's look at what the lore says, both back in the day and also now, because it is one of the most absolutely brutal fights I have ever read. It's insane and so over the top. But before we dive in, I just want to stress that I myself do not buy into the notion that Sanguinius' death is meaningless now, or was rendered less, and I never did. Just wanted to make that clear in case it wasn't absolutely crystal before. Yeah, to me it is beyond the ultimate sacrifice. But there are some interesting twists and some very intense ironies that make it a lot deeper now than it has ever been. Still, some questions remain. From Codex Angels of Death in 1996, Horus was the greatest Primarch and the most trusted of the Emperor's generals. None guessed that he owed his success to more than mortal courage. Later events showed that Horus served a darker master, and that his loyalty to humanity was nothing more than a pretense from the start. Somehow his gene seed had mutated, corrupting both the Primarch and his legion. While pretending to fight for humanity, Horus and the troops under his command were actually slaves of the Chaos Gods. When the time was right, Horus turned on the Emperor, leading his legions upon Earth in an attempt to crush the Emperor in one swift blow. Between 9 to 11 legions sided with Horus, accounting for more than half the entire Space Marine forces, and including the most experienced and battle-hardened troops in the Imperium. It would take many pages to describe in full the attack of Horus upon Earth and his subsequent defeat. Suffice to say, the short war ended when the Emperor teleported onto Horus's battle barge and slew the traitor. However, before he died, Horus mortally wounded the Emperor and killed Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels. Now, Angels of Death only has one more paragraph on the Horus Heresy, and kind of glosses over the Emperor being installed on the Golden Throne and the traitor Marines falling further into chaos. But I love how different this old lore is. Sanguinius' death is literally a one-liner, just a throwaway like, oh yeah, that one guy died, and then... I mean, this is not even close to adequate, but okay. So let's look at the lore from 3rd edition, since Angels of Death was the 2nd edition codex for the 9th Legion. Blood Angels and Dark Angels actually shared their first codex, which is actually an absolute gem. Check it out if you get the chance. It's really fun. But yeah, the 3rd edition is when they really injected a lot of lore into the game. When the Horus Heresy novels were not even on the horizon yet, and the lore was mostly in the rule book, codices, and White Dwarf Index Astartes articles. It was actually many years into Warhammer before I even heard someone use the word lore to describe the background. We only ever called it fluff, as that's about all there was at that point. Until, as I said a minute ago, that 3rd edition came along. And it has just been a wild ride since then. Okay, so the 3rd edition codex from 1998 says this about the death of Sanguinius. The oldest legends tell of the noble Sanguinius, sire of the Blood Angels. They tell of his grace and beauty, his love for humanity, his pure soul and unswerving loyalty to the Emperor. Some claim that he had the power of prophecy, that his eye saw along the winding tracts of time into the future. It is even maintained that he foresaw the terrible things to come, and was aware of his own doom long before the Emperor's realm was shaken to its foundations by the treacherous War Master. If this is true, then Sanguinius' acts are even more selfless because of it. Brave Sanguinius faced the War Master in his lair when the foul beast was at the height of its powers. Even before he was imbued with the false energies of the dark gods, the traitorous fiend was all but unstoppable. Yet knowing this, noble Sanguinius still met it blade to blade, eye to eye. When the treacherous serpent whispered promises of glory and strength into his ear, Sanguinius did not listen. Even as the great traitor was poised on the brink of infernal victory, the Lord of the Blood Angels was not swayed, though he knew it would cost him his life. Like all true servants of the Emperor, the noble angel knew that his soul would be forever with the Emperor, a reward far greater than any in this mortal world. And so it was that they fought, the angel and the beast. Titanic must have been the struggle between those two gods amongst men. Long must they have rained blows upon one another, until it seemed that the life of the universe itself hung in the balance. And yet, for all his glorious might at arms and his noble and pure mind, Sanguinius was bested. The despicable trickeries of chaos were his undoing. But at that last moment, even as the blade of death waited to strike him, Sanguinius would not turn from the light. Thus it was that the noble Sanguinius, Lord of the Blood Angels, passed from this world. He who was everything a man should be was taken from us by the darkness. 1,000 times 1,000 years of lamenting will never atone for our loss. Therefore, remember, proud Sanguinius, young acolytes, when you are faced with hardship. When the armor of your faith is buckled and torn, see in your mind that magnificent hero. Think upon his deeds and be humble, for his like will never walk the galaxy again. Chaplain Lamartie's sermon to the Adeptus on the cult of Sanguinius. Okay, so Lamartie's is trying to inspire new blood angels and Imperial citizens with what is their vision of the myth of Sanguinius, but it still doesn't have that definitive proof that people claim is there in the lore, that Sanguinius' fate all came down to putting a chink in Horus's armor, the serpent's scales. Index Astartes 2, Angels of Death, has the White Dwarf article that first appeared in the early 2000s, when they were going into the lore and they were fleshing out the legions and the Primarchs, going from fluff to actual lore. But there isn't really that much there. It is mostly told from the point of view of a blood angel who has succumbed to the Black Rage and is about to be put down, and is told as a hallucination occurring in a fugue state. But there's some actual non-interrogation of a Death Company Marine lore there as well. Here's what it says about the death of Sanguinius. From the collated reports of these experiments, referring to interrogating the Death Company Marine, it is possible to draw a conclusion from the valuable evidence provided by those suffering the Black Rage. Sanguinius is thought to have undergone unimaginable psychic damage at the hands of the War Master, who, it is believed by many Blood Angels, could not best him in personal combat. Horus, in his limitless malice, made sure that Sanguinius' death was the most painful and foul that the boundless evils in his service could administer. The War Master's psychic assault echoed not just throughout space, but also throughout time, resonating in the souls of his children. The Primarch's sacrifice is thought to have kept Horus occupied long enough for the Emperor to reach the traitor in the very depths of his lair, where the Emperor eventually bested him at a terrible cost. The pain inflicted upon the Primarch was so total that every one of his sons carries the echo imprinted deep within their soul to this day. And so it was that the Blood Angels came to bear their blood curse. and they still bear it. Okay, so it seems pretty consistent up through 3rd edition, both in the codices and Index Astartes articles. So where's this chink that Sanguinius put in Horus's armor? The most dominant talking point about the final battle of the Great Angel, and so far up through 3rd edition Warhammer 40K, it doesn't seem to exist. So before diving into the current lore, let's take one more look in one more place before we put a pin in this one and chalk it up to in-universe propaganda and myth. If it is anywhere, it will be in the book Visions of Heresy, and what a tome this one is. Rarer than rare and full of absolutely gorgeous art and the early lore, as in-depth as it gets at the time. This was the place to see what was what, and, well, not in there either. It appears that it may just be a one-liner from a white dwarf in 1989, or so legend holds. Otherwise, this chink in the armor that Blood Angels fans are raving about all the time could be non-existent. And I dove down the rabbit hole, chasing the rumor that it originated in a white dwarf in 1989. And from what I can see, it does not. But I will admit that I don't have any white dwarfs from 1989. But I do actually have the White Dwarf Compendium from that year. So it doesn't have everything, but it does have a lot. But I looked and looked and looked and just couldn't find it anywhere. If you know where it is, then please let me know in the comments. And with that, we go to the current lore and the absolutely amazing fight between the Great Angel and the Arch Traitor that we get in the End and the Death Part 2. It starts out as usual, with Horus glad to see Sanguinius, thinking he's seen reason and coming over to Horus's side. But Sanguinius is the same as ever and rejects that BS. So we get this knockdown drag-out fight that goes on and on. But Horus is holding back, not revealing that he's swoller than swole on the chaos juice. He faces Sanguinius as he had been, before ascending. Horus wanted to see just if it was true that his brother could take him at his baseline level. And Sanguinius, though he'd been wounded as hell from fighting Angron and Kabanda and killing those titans and battling chaos for 6 months straight without rest for even a moment, still beats Horus. Well, at first. And what Abnett does is magic, and it plays on this whole chink in the armor thing. For it was clear from the start the cards are stacked in his brother's favor. He knows he has to exploit every chink in the War Master's armor, physical and mental, if he is to have a chance of winning. He has to force every crack and make new ones besides. Rage will be one of them, perhaps the key one. If he can goad his fallen brother into outright anger, he can level the field a little. For Horus enraged will be Horus diminished. Though far stronger and monumental, Horus will be reduced to bewildered passion, and Sanguinius will be able to dictate the terms of the clash and reduce his foes with surgical rigor and clear judgment. He is close to that break point. He has spiked the War Master's exasperation. He knows Horus just as he knows the vengeful spirit. He knows his brother's secret levels and concealed floors because Horus taught them to him in those far-off days before the shadow fell. That's the kind of internal monologue we get during this fight, and Sanguinius still believes he might be able to win. And Dan Abnett isn't done yet playing with this notion of the chink in the armor. That little mention of it as the Primarch faced off was only a taste. Sanguinius speeds between maul and claw, loops, dummies, flits left, and drives the tip of Encarmine deep into Horus's hip. The serpent's scales puncture like paper, exhaling steam, oozing thick, curdled blood that runs black. The gleaming angel's relentless circuits around his ponderous foe have become a kind of dance. Nimble, acrobatic, unstinting, elegant, there's intricate grace in his every movement. A demonstration of faultless martial prowess that no one in the universe could replicate. It is dazzling in its exactitude, fluid and pure, almost performative, like a rite or sacred act. There's no effort wasted, no redundancy. Abnett blows some hot air up Sanguinius' ass and makes him out to be also super awesome, and the Great Angel gets some serious blows in on Horus. This goes so far beyond just a chink in the armor kind of thing. He absolutely shreds Horus. Horus's war gear is scattered in a double dozen places, gouges of bare metal stripe and notches plate. The wolf pelt is torn and slashed, severed dermal pipes swing and drip, blood and plasma drool from ruptures. The armor's reactors and shield generators cough and moan to maintain stability. Horus himself, his sweating face bathed in raw bloodlight, snarls and grunts, twisting and turning, churning and heaving, but every massive motion is too slow or too late to catch his tormentor. Every footfall is a thunderous Titan step ringing and grinding on the deck, and the deck itself is broken in 100 places. So Sanguinius is absolutely working Horus over. I mean, it looks like Ivan Drago beating down Apollo Creed. Sanguinius slams Horus through a column, literally shattering it, and as Horus is getting up, we as readers, even though we've known how this fight ends since before most Warhammer fans were born, get this feeling like the angel might actually win. We get filled with hope for a moment, if even just a little bit, and the angel is on the traitor. He turns, but Sanguinius is on him again, arcing like a seeker missile, and Carmine, swung with both hands at full force, strikes the War Master's front plating. Failing reactive shields pop with a bang. The blade strikes a thick section clean off the lip of the gorget, and leaves a bloody tear across the Lupercal's left brow and cheek. Horus roars like a woken dragon. The rage is here. Yeah, that's the first part of the fight, and you can see that Sanguinius had the upper hand in every way. Horus smashed some craters into the ground with his maul, got pissed off, raged, swung and whiffed the air, smashed more craters into the ground, got beat down, thrown through a pillar, and punctured far too many times. This is way more that Sanguinius does to Horus now than he ever did in the old lore in any way. I mean, one single chink and some armor? Come on, now he lands several dozen blows that would have killed a lesser man, probably even in Astartes. He spills a lot of Horus's blood and even puts a big dent in the War Master's pride by cutting his face up. And he does a lot more, some of which is absolutely crazy. But then the story shifts to Horus's perspective, and he lets in the powers of chaos. And this is the single most badass, brutal, barbaric, total beatdown I think that's ever been described, that I know of at least, fictional or otherwise. Before I read this, I must say that I listened to the audiobook version, and then let my wife hear it. The entire time she's saying, I don't want to keep listening to this, or this is supposed to be enjoyable? To which I'd say, nope, it's supposed to be grimdark, and it's supposed to hurt like hell. Now we both agreed that it was really well done, and that it was way over the top, but also that it was heartbreaking, even tear-inducing. Like, this is tragic and heroic and 1,000 times more detailed than anything we've ever had in the lore before this. It wasn't supposed to end like this. You, on your knees, eviscerated, gasping for breath. Him, standing over you, so noble and just, his sword raised in both hands, ready to strike. Sanguinius looks down at you, over his raised shoulder. A fractional pause, spaced enough for a last chance. You see the pity in his gaze, the sorrow, the longing. He's still hoping for a different answer. He won't get one. You can see his disbelief. You can see him thinking, it wasn't supposed to end like this. Time's up. The pause ends. He brings the sword down. He's so fast you don't even see it coming. The perfect execution stroke. The most precise, most merciful, most important sword stroke he would ever deliver. But it will not land. Worldbreaker's haft stops in Carmen dead. The jarring shock travels back through the blade, through his arms and through him. It jolts him backwards even as the sparks of contact are still dancing. Astonishment blinks in his eyes. He swings again, a hastier blow, his arms like lead from the trauma of the blocking impact. Your talon fends the blade away. Now he tries a lancing thrust fueled by mounting desperation. You catch his sword against the head of your maul and flip the stroke aside. That look on his face, it's gratifying. He can't believe you're on your feet. He can't understand why your wounds aren't slowing you down. He can't comprehend where your fluid speed is suddenly coming from. It was always there. You're just not holding back anymore. You let him come at you, blow after blow, each one a death stroke, each one an exemplar of the swordsman's art. Even in despair, his talent doesn't abandon him. None of them work. You bat them away as they come, with maul, then talon, then maul again. You want to give him a moment to let the despair really sink in. It wasn't supposed to end like this. That's what he thought. Well, it was never going to. You relished the challenge, but the contest is over. You can see he understands this. Besides, he has demonstrated that he isn't going to change his mind either. He won't bend to your will. You thought he might, but he won't. Such a pity. Such a waste. And so ungrateful. You offered him everything. Everything. He spurned you. He declined your gift. Graceless, thankless wretch. No one does that to you. Neither of you is playing anymore. You don't think he ever was, not really, not the way you were. But there was still a sense of restraint, as though his abiding belief in you was pulling his blows in the hope that you might repent. Whatever may have been the case, he's not playing now. He's bent on killing you, for real. He wants to kill you more than he wants to save himself. He's attacking, not defending. It appears he still thinks he's invincible. He is not. He's nothing like invincible and nowhere near invulnerable, as he is about to discover. The prophecy stands. The dreams were real. Your favorite brother should have heeded them. Fate is ordained and it demands payment. Everyone pays, Sanguinius, some in a moment, some for the rest of their lives. There are no loopholes, no exceptions. He thought he'd found a subclause in the logic of fate's contract that would allow him to live. The dreams told him plainly that he would die the day he faced you, but he convinced himself that this day did not count as a day. It couldn't be a day, for time had ground to a halt, and thus the prophecy could not be fulfilled. This casuistry had worked for him before. He had used it to deny fate several times, perhaps more times than any other son. He thinks he can do it again. Well, fate has grown tired of his prevarications. It is no longer charmed by his constant, clever escapes and dialectic evasions. And so are you. There is no intellectual technicality to exploit here. Sanguinius is naive if he thinks that fate works that way, especially at this macrocosmic level. This is the day, the final day. Days, like brothers, come in different types with different qualities. They do not all have to work together and run in series, seriatim. A day can be alone and singular. This is your day. You have decreed its dimensions and its duration. It is a single day of days, endless and eternal, and nothing can outlast it, no matter how hard it tries. Here he comes, in carmine gleaming. He still thinks he's going to win. You dodge the blade. You swing World Breaker. He evades, but you hadn't intended for the maul to hit him anyway. The swing was just to scare him into the air. He takes flight, white wings wide, a flash of gold to encircle you and strike you down from above. He trusts in his one advantage, the ability to fly, and turn a two-dimensional fight into a three-dimensional assault. But what are his 3 dimensions compared to the multitude you command? He soars above you, a vertical ascent. You reach along the 8th angle of space and grab. Your talon closes around his trailing ankle. His climb arrests with a brutal jolt. For a second, he's anchored in the air. You bring him down hard, swinging him by the leg like a hammer into the deck. You let time slow so you can relish every detail of this moment. You gaze down at him. He lies on his back, full length in a crater of mashed deck plates. One wing spread wide, the other pinned and folded under him. His arms draped open, his hair a golden halo behind his head, one leg bent like a dancer's. You're still holding his other leg, like a haft to wield him by. You let go of his ankle. The leg falls, heavy and straight. No more flying. You step back. Your heart is racing. The satisfaction was exhilarating. You weigh Worldbreaker in your hand, ready and waiting. How long will it take him? A minute? 2? No, less. His eyes blink open. He doesn't realize where he is for a moment. He doesn't know what's going on. The impact has knocked all sense from him, and he'll register the pain before anything else. That wing's broken, ribs too, the ankle you swung him by. Pain will be flooding him as he wakes. You see him wince, a convulsion of his chest, his face screwing up in a grimace. He chokes, coughs blood. It dribbles off his lips. Is he done? Surely he's done. Nobody... You give him some credit, grudgingly. He's not giving up. He tries to roll onto his side, but the grinding pain of the broken wing stops him. He flops back. He rolls the other way. He tries to rise. He makes it onto his hands and knees. He gropes for his fallen sword. It's just out of reach, along with most of his broken hopes and the memories that were smashed out of him. Go on. Get up. Let's see if he can. Hunched over, broken wing dragging like a limp ermine cloak behind him, he crawls. He makes no sound. Not one whimper or groan of pain. That's impressive. You balance Worldbreaker, ready. He's found the sword. He clutches it tightly by the grip, breathing hard, and uses it tipped down as a support as he drags himself upright. And he's up. He's standing, though awkwardly, keeping his weight off that shattered ankle. He's panting like a dog, chest heaving. He wipes the blood from his mouth. For a second, you want to offer him the chance to submit. He's extended you the same courtesy, so it only seems fair. But this is your court, and you decide what's fair. This is your house. You're a man of your word, and you told him there would be no mercy. So, there will be no mercy. He turns to look at you. You are already descending on him, bringing them all down. Somehow he avoids it. Worldbreaker kills another section of the deck. He's swinging in carmine at your head. The talon parries it. Sparks fly. You sweep Worldbreaker at him, but he deflects it with a crossbody slash. You lunge to seize him by the throat. He evades the snapping talon and thrusts his blade around your guard. You knock it away before it bites. He's got a little left, a little strength, a little speed, more than you expected. He deserves his fame. You exchange blows, trading 4 in rapid succession, each one parried or hooked aside. Oh, he's good, even now, still trying. Death has brought out the best in him. Maybe despite everything, he still thinks he's invincible. You will disabuse him of that notion. You slam your lethal claws around him to crush him. He isn't there. He slipped aside, a flash of gold as fast as a sunbeam, evading you at the speed of light. But you move at the speed of darkness. You catch him on the backswing, your talons shearing locks of his hair and snapping his head sideways. Worldbreaker does the rest. It hits him just above the hip, folds him double, and hurls him across the court like a doll. He flies one last time. His spinning body strikes the ornate prayer screen of your private chapel. The fretwork, carved from solid diorite without any trace of tool marks, smashes as he goes through it. Small splinters of stone clatter to the deck. You follow him. You walk over to the side chapel, slowly. There's no reason to hurry. The bladed head of your maul is matted with blood and golden hair. You walk past the shattered screen to the entrance and look in. He has landed, face down, on the cool stones of the floor, his feet towards you, his head towards your altar. There are pieces of broken fretwork all over the floor around him, and his body has knocked over 3 metal stands of votive candles. Smoke trickles up from the fallen candles that have gone out. There are 100,000 other candles in here, on other stands, on the floor, in niches, and on ledges. Their flames gutter and flicker as you enter the shrine, your mass stirring the air. You see him move. The injury you have done to him is catastrophic, and it has also torn open the old wound, the one Angron inflicted. Blood is pooling under the angel in a wide scarlet mirror. You see him shudder as he tries to lift his head, and his arms spasm as he tries to raise his shoulders and his chest. He won't be getting up this time. When he raises his head, shaking and weak, the altar is the first thing he sees right in front of him. You see him recoil at the sight of it. He can't help but stare, his chest lifted on bent arms, his body trailing flat like a supplicant prostrate. The altar is wrought of predynastic dacite and chthonic hemaquartz. You had it intricately inscribed with syncretic sigils, entwined figures of Concordia and Discordia, of Kronos and Kairos, the form of the Ouroboros in the abstract convolutions of the eternal labyrinth, which has no way in and no way out. You have also had it etched with certain phrases and texts that the whispers of the court have told you are sacred. It has 8 wide steps like a ziggurat, with a pyramidion of alchemically tempered azoth at the apex. You have placed many candles and tapers on the shelves of the steps, crowded around the relics you display there. They are skulls, each one ritually arranged face out so that their empty orbits stare at anyone who enters the chapel. There are thousands of them, some old, some fresh, some brown with time, some white as snow. Most of them are human. One is set centrally, in pride of place. It is the one Sanguinius sees first when he lifts his trembling head. Its gaping sockets gaze back at him. The yellowed bone of its brow is carved with the numeral 10. This is where it will end. This cross here. You hear the angel murmur, a single wretched gasp. Manus. It's the only sound he's uttered since you began to kill him. You stand behind him. You give him a moment to appreciate the reunion and to realize what it signifies. Until we meet again, that's long enough. Who lacks now, brother? You ask. He tries to turn over and face you. You grasp him by that broken ankle and drag him out behind you. He slides backwards on his belly, hands raking and pawing at the bloody flagstones to resist, but there's nothing to grip. He leaves a long smear of blood on the floor behind him. It isn't supposed to end like this. Nevertheless, it does. It takes just a moment, though he has all the time in the world. Horus Lupercal holds all of time, stilled in one hand and Sanguinius in the other. Sanguinius, broken beyond measure, gazes up at the soaring arches of the Lupercal court. Even broken, he will not go quietly. Even broken, he will not make this easy. Lupercal growls. Does he relish this? Hate it? Consider it an annoying waste of time when he has better things to do? There's no way to fathom him, for he is no longer remotely human. And Sanguinius doesn't care. He can feel the gaze of the old four on him, staring from the shadows with eyes as bleak and wicked as the one adorning his brother's breastplate. They have come to witness this and everything that will follow. They mutter to each other excitedly, and around them, the numberless legions of their spawn gibber and whisper in delight. Sanguinius can feel the sheer size of them, the mass of the dark gods. He will show them the defiance of mankind to his last breath. Horus lifts him off the ground, pincered in his talon. Every fractured bone and tear in Sanguinius's body shrieks as he hangs there. Blood blurts from between his torn lips, squeezed out of his body. Worldbreaker rises in the monster's other hand. Sanguinius lashes out with his left hand, gouging desperate fingers at his brother's cheek and eyes. Horus barks in a rage and drops his prey. Sanguinius falls onto his knees, jarring every wound, then topples onto his side. He tries to rise, trembling, weak. He wants to be on his feet when it happens. He wants to be standing when Worldbreaker catches him before he is even back on his knees. The clubbing blow breaks his left shoulder, ribs, and left femur. He collapses, trying not to scream from the pain, and failing. Horus starts to bludgeon him, beating him repeatedly like a disobedient dog. There's no art in this anymore, no martial skill, No patience. Worldbreaker shreds armor and flesh. It pulverizes both collarbones. It ruptures a lung. A fine drizzle of blood fumes the air around the two figures, the brutal beating giant and his prey. The sixth hammering impact twists Sanguinius' head around, shattering his jaw and transmitting such force that the skin on the left half of his face, from brow to chin, is flayed loose. It flutters, then drapes back like a slack mask. As he falls forward, the talon vices him again. It lifts the ruined, tattered angel into the air until he is face to face with the first found instrument of chaos. Horus squeezes slowly. He is expecting some last word, some immortal and heroic declaration to mark the end of a majestic, noble life. It ought to be something good, something appropriate, but Sanguinius is no longer capable of speech. He is drowning in his own blood. The claws close. There's a double crack of spine and neck. Horus waits. Blood drips. It's done. The talon opens with a mechanical clank. His brother's corpse, so loose and mangled it seems almost boneless, drops to the deck. An ugly sound of impact to mark an ugly ending. Horus sighs and walks away. Things scurry forward from the shadows to nail the body up. So, in light of that tragic ending, there are some quotes and moments from the End of the Death Part 3 and elsewhere in the lore that I thought were of note, especially in regards to the angel's soul. Furio states, Sanguinius being dismembered by irritable gods, immense, stooped, and obese gods. Even more than dead, he has suffered a fate worse than death. His spirit and soul have been annihilated. And then, when it's kind of describing the moment right before the Black Rage really hits the Blood Angels, there's this sort of description of how his soul was basically fragmented through space and time both, but that shards of it were basically dangerous, and when they struck certain things happen. Anyway, his dreams, his visions scatter outwards, for he has no further use for them, and they are no longer his to own. They whiz away from him, like shrapnel from a detonation, and like shrapnel they are sharp and lethal. The fragments are edged with his pain, his hope, his regret, his anger. Though he does not intend them to, they will cause great and lasting harm. Where they land, where they hit, they will do damage. So let's look at some of the other sources in the old lore and see how they compare to that absolutely brutal, yet so well done destruction that Abnett wrote in the End of the Death Part 2. Upon Horus's ship, the Emperor and his warriors found themselves separated, each forced to confront a sea of warp-spawned horrors alone. At length, the Emperor fought his way to the bridge, only to find Horus standing over the broken body of his brother Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion. Turning, Horus faced his creator, and in an instant, the two were engaged in a battle likened to that between gods. The Emperor triumphed. He slew his most beloved son, destroying utterly his presence in the warp and casting his blasted form to the deck. But the Emperor had paid the highest price for his victory, and death overcame him as he finally allowed his body to suffer the terrible wounds Horus had inflicted. Chaos Space Marines Codex 3.5 edition, page 5. And the original lore from The Lost and the Damned from 1990. They are ambushed by scuttling skull-faced things in the armor of Marines. They fight hordes of mutated beasts. One by one they die. In the end, the Emperor stands alone. Then, and only then, is he allowed to enter the presence of Horus. The War Master bestrides the body of a broken angel. Behind him, the tortured earth fills the viewport, a bauble for Horus to seize with one clawed hand. Corpses of massacred Marines lie everywhere. Face glowing with internal bloodlight, Horus speaks. Poor Sanguinius. I offered him a position of power in the New Order. He could have sat at the right hand of a god. Alas, he chose to align himself with the losing side. The Emperor stands, transfixed, trying to force frozen words from his tongue. In the end, he can only whisper, "Why?" Mad laughter rings out. Why? You ask me why? Have all those millennia taught you nothing? Weak fool, your timidity prevented you from binding the forces of chaos. You shied away from the ultimate power. I have bound it to my will and will lead humanity into the new age. I, Horus, master of chaos. And then finally back to the end in the death, part 3, where we kind of see the end for Sanguinius. The bright lord of Baal, head bowed and turned to the left, is crucified against the far wall. He hangs like an icon or relic, a sacred sigil to be worshipped and knelt before. His arms and wings are outstretched, his golden war gear dented and torn. Too many, far too many, black spikes have been driven through his body and limbs. The black wall beneath his arms and feet is washed red with the blood that has run down to pool beneath him in the litter of white feathers. No, murmurs Loken, no. My king, Kaikaltus says, showing the first emotion, true compassion, that Loken has ever known him express. The proconsul is genuinely shocked. He knows too well that Sanguinius prophesied his own death, and despite his father's efforts, went to meet it. He's braced to bear his master's grief. None comes. The Emperor ignores his companion. He steps towards the body on the wall. When he rejected the promise of godhood, he excised a great deal of his emotional core, too. He numbed his feelings so that crimes like this could not be turned into weapons against him. Take him down. Chink in armor is Imperial propaganda, probably first used by Blood Angels to cope, but eventually it is just the lore that the Imperium runs on, a pure coping mechanism, a myth and a legend born out of a tragedy of his death, where in fact Sanguinius absolutely shredded Horus's armor to the point he eviscerated Horus. He literally had his guts spilling out on his knees, about to be decapitated, his face even slashed by the Encarman blade, and the result was effectively nothing achieved. The flesh and armor both healed once Horus let the power of chaos swell within him. His holding back to face Sanguinius as the angel had known him before he ascended did prove one thing, though, that Sanguinius was indeed the better duelist, the more consummate fighter in general, and had actually won. But beating Horus was no easy task, and it nearly killed him to do it. Exhausted as he was by 6 months of constant fighting, defeating Kabanda and Angron, the Eternity Gate really took a toll on Sanguinius, and he still beat Horus in a fair fight. But once Horus was on his knees and had seen for himself, his curiosity was satisfied. He knew that Sanguinius was his better. And that is when he cranked up the chaos, took the gloves off, and set about the brutal massacre that occurred. Because after all, why would Horus lay it all on the line for a fair fight? Failing to win the angel to his side, he destroyed that which he could clearly see was his better in every way. This is a purely narcissistic action by Horus, and what is truly tragic. Sanguinius could beat the War Master, but not when he was torqued up and swole with the power of all 4 of the Chaos Gods. So ultimately it looks like rather than a full-on retcon, they went with a bit of a sidestep. No, the Emperor has not now, as he had before, destroyed Horus's soul utterly, erasing him from existence across all time, space, dimensions, the warp, real space, everywhere. But it does seem that perhaps Horus has now changed places with Sanguinius, because from everything we see, from Ferrus Manus to Furio to even Mephiston in the 40K era, whenever Sanguinius' fate is mentioned, it is always with this sad undertone of also mentioning how it was worse than death, beyond death, and how he was annihilated. Horus fed Sanguinius to the Chaos Gods. I believe he did it as a sacrifice, to gain even more favor with his patrons, the Old Four, before the final confrontation with his father, the Master of Mankind. Now there are surely shreds, and his soul is in Mephiston's mind, half in Mephiston, and there was the vision in the warp of the Black Angel and the Gold Angel and the Red Angel. It will take all three coming back together to reform Sanguinius, and those seem more like tattered fragments than restorable parts that can be reassembled into a whole. Thus, in effect, the ultimate sacrifice of Sanguinius is much, much more now than it ever was in the original lore. People who argue his death is now meaningless, and this does seem to be a lot of people, are missing the point that his soul was obliterated, literally stated to have been annihilated. His loss is much, much greater. But those same people argue his death achieved nothing. Well, there are actually two things it did. First, it was the literal embodiment of hope dying, the grimdark of the Imperium of Man setting in. Sanguinius went to the vengeful spirit knowing that his fate was to die, but he also fooled himself, saying that he couldn't die that day, as aboard the ship he would be in the warp, and there's no time and there are no days in the warp, and he wanted to prove fate wrong. However, he had to do it. Either way, his vision showed himself dying to Horus. That meant that if the Emperor went and faced Horus alone, and before Sanguinius could, then Horus would still be alive to face Sanguinius, which would mean he triumphed over the Emperor. And that is something that Sanguinius would gladly give his life to stop. He knew his fate, and he knew it was inextricably tied to the fate of his father. To face it head on, that was all he could do. It wasn't enough to have to give his life either. He had to surrender his soul and the sanity of his sons. And he did it because, after all, the angel was the greatest of the Primarchs, and his sense of honor and duty rivaled even that of Rogel Dorn, the Lion, and Russ. Anything but giving all that was required of him would have been less than all he could do. And he did all he could do in the name of hope, knowing that not only would he be pulped and desecrated in body, but annihilated in mind and spirit. Truly the greatest sacrifice ever made, exceeding possibly even that of his fathers. Sanguinius is an Imperial saint for a reason. So yeah, in my opinion, Sanguinius' death has not been retconned. The chink in the armor was always propaganda, but it has been explained thoroughly now. The kinks have been ironed out, and some misconceptions that have lingered are now better understood. It would only be appropriate that after 10,000 years, some of the details were confused. That, to me, only makes the story that much richer. That people believe, in-universe and in the real world, the version of events with the chink in the armor making all the difference, that gives the average Imperial citizen hope. And as we just saw, hope can be the greatest motivator of all, and sometimes can move mountains. So, thanks for diverting off on this tangent with me as we explore the end and the death and the final battle. I thought I had to cover this rather than glossing over it before diving into the final battle between Horus and the Emperor, between light and darkness, between evil and eviler. No, between evil and a different flavor of evil. So make sure to check out the first two parts of the lore of the Emperor on the channel, and keep your eyes out for part 3, which will pick up right where part 2 ended, with the Emperor arriving at Lupercal's court and seeing the body of Sanguinius strung up. Thanks for watching.